owner, and every week they came out 400 cities. Many black cities had 2 or 3 newspapers. The Washington, D.C., where I grew up, there was the Washington Tribune, but there's also the Washington edition of the Afro-American, and there's also the Washington edition of the Pittsburgh Courier. And in there, whenever you did something, like graduating from school with honors, they had a little story in there. They had pictures of our various social events, things that we don't see now. The only papers we really see now are the Amsterdam News and the Carib News, and a couple of others, the Beacon, a couple of other papers. But at that time, the way in which the black community was connected was through the black press. And because of that, they were able to put pressure on Franklin Roosevelt to do 3 things. 1, to pass a law or an executive order eliminating unequal pay in the defense industry. So they created what was known as the FEPC, the Fair Employment Practices Commission, that saw to it that all the companies that got government contracts for the war paid black folks the same as white folks for the same job. That helped to build the black middle class, particularly around Detroit, Cleveland, Chicago, where they were building planes and ships in San Francisco. And then that was the first thing that NAACP was threatening, was pressuring. The next thing, they wanted to have a black general, a full general. Despite the Buffalo Soldiers and the 369 Men of Bronze, there had never been a black general. So as a result of that, he appointed Benjamin O. Davis Sr., who was the senior general, senior colonel among the black troops in the 93rd Division. So he appointed him as a full general, a brigadier general, first one. And the third thing they wanted was to have blacks get an opportunity to be in combat aviation groups, because the Air Force actually had an official policy that began in 1925 that said that blacks didn't have the intelligence, the coordination, or the ability to follow orders to be pilots. And therefore, there were no pilots who were black between 1925 and 1940. Even though there were some distinguished pilots, among them Bessie Coleman, of course, who was the first black woman to have a license in 1926, and then C. Alfred Anderson and Dr. Forsythe from Atlantic City, who flew all the way across the country, and then there's Eugene Bullard, and then there was Hubert Julian. Chester, you knew Hubert Julian, didn't you? Hubert Julian,
the Eagle.
Yes. Colonel.
The Eagle.
He's the one, the Black Eagle. He was a real showman.
Oh.
Most of the time the show didn't work out. For example, he was going to fly non-stop to Europe. He took off from Roosevelt Field and he flew about 15 miles and he crashed. He also was the one-man Air Force for Haile Selassie in the Ethiopian-Italian War, and he crashed that plane. But then he came back to New York because he was a fast talker. He had a good-looking wife, he had lots of money, and he had a spectacle, and he wore a cane, he wore spats, and he was in Harlem. Colonel Hubert Julian. Now, some of you may think I'm lying, but you can check out each one of these facts on the internet. Just put them in and you'll find out what you'll find out about these people. But what I was saying, that's the climate. The pressure from the NAACP, pressure from the black press to create the Tuskegee Airmen. So finally, they decided, with Roosevelt's push, to create one squadron, a fighter squadron, the 99th Pursuit Squadron. But why did they decide to create one squadron? Because if you're a bomber pilot, if you captain of a bomber ship, you're over 10 men. So that meant the black pilots who were bombers would be over white people. So they didn't want that because they let them sit in one plane, single engine plane, the pursuit plane, and they called it the 99th. Some of you probably remember from your childhood that in the newspaper they talked about 99th created, 99th going to be in the military. And then the question was, where would they be trained? The NAACP, with its integrationist ideas, thought that we should be trained in an integrated situation. 2 here, 2 here, 2 here. But the problem was that practically all of the training sites were in the South in segregated communities. And we knew that with the segregation there, they'd be able to pick off 2 guys here, 2 guys there, and so on. So that's where Tuskegee comes in. Fred Patterson, who was the president, had worked with Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt in the Rosenwald Foundation. Now, some of you probably don't remember the Rosenwald Foundation. The Rosenwald Foundation is responsible for a lot of blacks getting PhDs because Rosenwald, Julius Rosenwald, who was the head of Sears Roebuck, created this foundation to do high schools and higher education for blacks, so that even people like myself, one of my claims to fame is I got the last Rosenwald scholarship because at the 1948 they cleaned it out because they said, look, the GI Bill, you don't need that. But I had the GI Bill, and I also knew Dr. John W. Davis in West Virginia State, and he said apply for Rosenwald. So I did better as a graduate student. I had the GI Bill, I had the Rosenwald, I had an assistant, and I made more than some of the professors. Only making $3,000 at that time. Remember, we're talking about a little bit of money.
You didn't have to play the numbers.
So what occurred was that Fred Patterson said, well, look, we've got a good black community here in Tuskegee. It's segregated in Alabama. We have our own community. We have our own business, our own drugstores, our own barbershops, our beauty shops, our own theaters, and this would be a warming, comfortable environment for us to do the training. So as a result, Mrs. Roosevelt helped them to get some money to build Moton Field, which was the field where the first training, the primary training took place. And Moton Field is still around. It is now a National Historic Site off of Route 38 between Montgomery and Alabama and Atlanta. And if you go there, you will see the hangars that our planes were in. You'll see replicas of our planes. You see some of our pictures. It's a great thing, because Moton Field was the place where we first learned to fly. Then, because you go for pilot training, for primary training, first place, basic training, you fly more complicated and advanced training where you fly planes with a retractable landing gear. Moton Field couldn't accommodate those big planes, so the government, showing how racist it was, put up $1,200,000 to build a separate air base to train blacks. Even though we could have been trained somewhere else, they built a separate air base to train blacks. Then the question was, who was going to run it? They had a white colonel to run it. His name was Von Kimball. But he didn't believe in the project, and he set up segregated signs on the base. So the black had to go to one bathroom and one mess hall, and the white person. That didn't last very long because the newspaper, the Courier, the Amsterdam News, began to say, look, they're segregating the blacks on their own base. They removed Von Kimball, and they brought in a man by the name of Noel Parrish, who was a colonel from Kentucky, who was an educated man, who really understood that there was no inherent difference between blacks and whites, and if blacks had the opportunity, they would do it. So when he got to be the commander, he took down all the racist signs, and he went to the mess hall himself. He even had a black girlfriend, and so
he was all in.
But anyway, he saw to it that we got rigorous training. The instructors were white instructors, because there were no white officers, but he insisted that they be fair. Now, one of the things about being fair is you have to be fair under the system, because they could only train a certain number of pilots in each class. many times they were qualified men who were washed out, failed out before they got their wings, where if they would have been on the white base, they would have gotten wings. So as a result, you have the absolute best getting their wings, but there were some others who were almost as good, who should have, but washed out because of the quota system. You may know some of those people, but some of them actually went to distinguished careers. One of them was a guy by the name of Percy Ellis Sutton. Percy Sutton founded the Inner City Broadcasting Company, saved the Apollo, and was the girlfriend ran for mayor. But Percy, when he was washed out, went to intelligence officer school in Miami Beach, which was one of the few places where they let blacks train with whites. And while he was there, he got to be friends with a great movie actor by the name of Clark Gable.
That's right.
And Percy tells the story of how, when they graduated with their second lieutenant's commission, he brought Clark Gable to Harvard. That's one of Percy's stories, and I think it's true. We know Percy has a great, he's one of the greatest guys in the world. Percy has a great imagination and made things happen. So Percy ended up being the intelligence officer for the 332nd. He would be the one who would tell us where the missions were going, where the enemy gunfire was, and what to do if we were captured. The only problem was, sometimes he was wrong. So he said, there's not going to be any aircraft. We go boom, 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 boom. When we come back, we all do Percy. He said, Percy, what are you talking about? He said, well, you got to give me a chance. Sometimes even smart people like me make mistakes. So that's the kind of person who was in the Tuskegee Airmen who didn't have the opportunity to graduate. But once you graduated, then they made you transition into military aircraft, the P-40, the Warhawk that was flown by the Flying Tiger, which was not a very good airplane. But we did that training at Tuskegee Army Air Base, and then they sent us to Selkirk Field in Michigan, outside of Detroit. Well, that was an interesting thing because Detroit was having this large number of blacks from the South to work in the industry, and there was a lot of racism there. And they actually had 2 or 3 race riots in Detroit, Michigan. So that then, because of that, they said, well, look, we can't train these Negroes here. We're going to send them down south where you'll be well placed. So they sent us to Walterboro, South Carolina, which is near Columbus, Columbia, South Carolina. And that's where we did our combat training, learning how to fly P-47s and the various combat planes we flew. After that, by the time I was in, I graduated college in March of '43, went to Tuskegee, went to Keesler Field, Mississippi, and then to Tuskegee. I graduated in '44, went to Walterboro in April of '45, combat. As a matter of fact, I looked it up. It's very interesting. What's today's date? April 18th.
August 18th.
Sorry. I looked it up in my logbook. I flew my first flight as a P-51 pilot on August 18, 1945. You know, I'm a researcher and I keep everything. I kept my logbook, every flight I ever flew. And I looked it up because I knew I was going to be talking today, and I said, August 18th, that was the first flight I flew, and then my first combat mission was August 22nd, and then I flew 68 combat missions.
Whoa!
Every European capital, Vienna, Budapest, Bucharest, Prague, Berlin, Munich, Athens, everyone. And I flew 68 combat missions, and I finished my combat at the end of the war, and I came back and I went into academic work. But the thing about the Tuskegee Airmen, by the time the 99th had been followed by 3 other squadrons, but they realized that nobody wanted just the 99th by themselves. When the 99th was first sent overseas to North Africa, they assigned them to the 79th Fighter Group. A guy named Colonel Momeyer was very prejudiced, and when it came time for the briefing for the mission, he gave them the wrong time, and when they got there, he said, well, I told you. They said, no, you didn't. It's in writing. Well, nevertheless, you all boys just fly. And that's the kind of systems they got. So much so that Time Magazine wrote a story that the Tuskegee Airmen, the 99th, was going to be a failure. And they called Colonel Davis, who had been made our commander. Now, what about Ben Davis Jr.? You heard me talk about Ben Davis Sr., the first black general. Well, Ben Davis Jr. was the first black to go to West Point in the 20th century. Henry O. Flipper had been the last in 1896. And he went to West Point in the 20th century, 1932, 1936. Not a single social word was spoken to him. So when he had to take dance lessons, which they made him do, he had to dance by himself. But they wouldn't let him dance with the white women who came in. That's the kind of racism.
Oh, wait, y'all wanted to.
But he finished in the top 10%. Smart man. He was chosen to be the commander of the Tuskegee Airmen in 99 because they said he'll know how to keep them in shape. The fact is he did keep us in shape, but he also encouraged us to be better. So when they realized that they were being unfair to the black troops, the black pilots, they said, well, look, let's create 3 more squadrons, 100th, 301st, and 302nd. And those squadrons, together with the 99th, became the 332nd. Now, you've heard the story about Red Tails, also in the movie. Now, why are we called Red Tails? Because the silver P-51s that we flew had shining red tails. That's why we were known as the Red Tails. And because of that, when we flew over the bombers, when the sun would shine, they would easily identify us as red tails, because some of the other squadrons had yellow tails and black and white tails and black and yellow tails. But the red tails became famous because we could easily be identified. And the other thing is, we stayed with the bombers. We stayed close to the bombers to protect them. And you meet people, white people, they're all white, who were flying bombers, come up to you and say, well, look, you saved my grandfather, you saved me. Because we stayed with the bombers. That was our reputation. But we were also very good. You saw in the movie, we blew up trains, which I did several times. We shot planes on the ground. We shot troops. We sunk a destroyer, which you saw in the movie. And as you know, we shot down the first jet over Berlin, which I did. Which was we were all great pilots. Altogether, we shot down 111 planes. We won 96 distinguished flying crosses. We lost 84 people in combat through accidents and being shot down. 32 were captured and came back. And we won the Distinguished Unit Citation, which is the highest honor they can give, for our mission to Berlin. So in that sense, we were a great success. And this was documented in the black press. 332nd over Berlin. Bronco Brown shoots down jet. Lee Archer scores victories. Lee Archer, one of my really great friends from New York. There were 3 or 4 of us from New York. There was Charlie Dryden, better known as A-Train. There was Lee Archer. Everybody knows Lee Archer. Let's see, who else was it? There was Lawrence Dixon was a handsome guy. He got shot down and he went down. Eldon Nightingale from 118th Street, he got shot down. I hate to tell you about it, but there were a lot of us from New York. So that when the war ended, we went different places. Some of us went back to graduate school. Some of us got their bachelor's degree on GI Bill. Some went into business. Some went into politics. George Brown, who was in one of our classes, became the Lieutenant Governor of Colorado. He's married to Modine. We did a lot of interesting things. But the most important thing which is really why we're here today. It's in 1948, Harry Truman signed Executive Order 9981, eliminating segregation in the military. That was the first time that any official agency said that segregation will not be tolerated, and that brought about integration in the military. It preceded the Brown case decision by 6 years. It preceded the Civil Rights Act by about 18 years. So basically, that happened. Now, the main reason that happened is when they did the study on the qualifications of black combat units, the Tuskegee Airmen were the #1 example. We flew on integrated missions, even though we flew together. We had an outstanding record. We were known throughout the military. And even though the 92nd Division, the 369th, the paratroopers and so on were known, the Tuskegee Airmen had the best public record that people could identify with. And that's why we are being honored now. Why it takes so long? The war ended in 45, integration came out in 48, we had the Korean War, we had the Vietnam War, we had Iraq, we had people going to space, we had Fred Gregory going up in the shuttles, we had Guy Gruber going up in the shuttle. They didn't really honor the Tuskegee Airmen until our good friend Charlie Rangel got together with Senator Carl Levin from Michigan and proposed that we receive collectively the Congressional Gold Medal, which is the highest award that anybody can get in this society. And that's what we're all very proud of, the Congressional Gold Medal. And now we've got the movies, and we've got plays, and we've got things going. Actually, tomorrow, next day, I'm going to be going to Washington, D.C. to consult on a new play about the Tuskegee Airmen that's going to show at Ford's Theater. That's the theater where Lincoln was assassinated. The name of the play is Fly. It's written by Trey Ellis and Ricardo Kahn, who was at the Crossroads Theater in New Jersey. And they're going to tell the story in a very real way about 5 guys who were Tuskegee Airmen. I have to say that other than Bill Pickett, all my best friends are Tuskegee Airmen. I won't say about the ladies, but there's one lady here who actually was over with the Tuskegee Airmen, Mary Louise Williams, better known as Jap. She was the Red Cross and helped to give us coffee and a lot of other things. What did you say?
USO Entertainment Group.
Did I say that? Anyway, we came back with the mission. Now let me tell you about those missions. We flew in seats that are smaller than the one that Pat Pickens is sitting in. It's like that. For 5 and 5.5 hours. Looking around by ourselves at 25,000 feet. And if we didn't see any enemy, we got back, and if we saw enemy, we got into combat, and so on. So that when we came back and landed, we were really out of it. But who was there? The USO, Jap, hot chocolate, coffee, donuts, and a big hug. You can't beat that. But the other thing I like to talk about is when you talk about the Tuskegee Airmen, you talk about the 996 pilots. But behind those 996 pilots, for every pilot, there are at least 13 enlisted and officer personnel as mechanics, as radio operators, as armament operators, as intelligence officers, as medical personnel. So collectively, we estimate about 15,000 African American men and some women, because we had some nurses and so on, participated in what we call the Tuskegee Experience. And the Tuskegee Airmen Organization recognizes them. And just a couple weeks ago, we had our annual conference in Las Vegas, where we honored various people. One of them, you probably know Nancy Colon, who was one of the first black nurses. She was one of our nurses at the Tuskegee Airmen. She lived at Long Island. So that's the story. But to give you a real sense of this, on August 31st, at the Republic Air Base at the American Air Power Museum in Farmingdale, you'll have a big air show they're going to have P-51s, they're going to have P-25s, P-20, but most of all, they're going to have the first flying German ME-262 jet that I shot down. So they're bringing me there to meet some of the pilots, so you guys might want to come to that. August 31st, American Air Power Museum. All right, I think that's enough. I think